Wolfgang Petersen's 2004 film Troy is an interesting adaptation. Based on the Bronze Age poem The Iliad, it takes quite a different structure than its source. But both stories are based on the same underlying blueprint, 3-act structure. Both stories use the 6 beats I explained in my overview video. It's just that different events occupy the same beats in the different versions. Why did screenwriter David Benioff, who later gained fame as half the writing duo behind the massively successful, loved, hated, and disastrous Game of Thrones adaptation, change so much of the source material? After all, this poem has been part of the canon of various cultures for thousands of years. In this video, we'll try to figure that out, while also trying to glimpse the life advice embedded in both versions of the story. This is Equipment for Living with Troy, and its source, the Iliad. Alright, get your bearings. Both Troy and the Iliad are about an incredible warrior called Achilles. In the poem, Achilles is the son of the Nereid sea nymph Thetis and the mortal king Peleus of Phthia. Later legends introduce the idea of Thetis dipping Achilles in the river Styx as an infant, granting him invulnerability everywhere except his heel, which Thetis held as she dunked him in. Later internet lore holds that something similar happened to Vin Diesel, except he was dipped in diesel, obviously.
Hit it, shark! A good chase! Boom!
This film version is entirely secular, so there are no gods or magic, and Achilles is not invulnerable. In both versions of the story, Achilles is incredibly proud. In the poem, he is preoccupied with his own honor, in the sense of reputation or public character. In the film, he is obsessed with glory, in the sense of great public achievements that outlast his own lifetime. Note the difference in character here. It's responsible for a lot of the movie's failings. I'm going to start breaking down the movie because it starts well before the poem. Once we've caught up, I'll explain the poem and then switch back to the movie. And note that my timings are based on the theatrical version of the movie, which would have received the greatest attention to spacing. The director's cut is superior, but it presumably has different timings. Okay? Okay. The movie opens with 2 armies massing for battle. The armies' respective kings decide to settle the battle with a single duel between their best warriors. The Thessalian champion Boagrius is massive. The Mycenaean king Agamemnon's champion Achilles is late. Nevertheless, he easily bests Boagrius, and we receive the film's theme in an exchange with the defeated king.
Give it to your king. He's not my king.
The film will be an essay on how to choose which master or god or desire to serve. From here on, every character will be introduced with a clear motivation or a clear desire that they serve. The god Achilles serves is glory. For Agamemnon, it's power. We then cut to Sparta, where Agamemnon's brother Menelaus is entertaining 2 princes of Troy, a city in modern-day Turkey across the Aegean Sea. The older brother is Hector, the best warrior of Troy. The god Hector serves is his country. The younger brother is Paris. The god he serves is love, as we are about to find out. He's having an affair with Menelaus' wife Helen, traditionally the most beautiful woman in the world. In the poem, Paris was given Helen by Aphrodite, as a bribe for choosing Aphrodite in a beauty contest with other goddesses. In the movie, he's just Orlando Bloom, which I guess checks out as an alternative explanation. At minute 14, Paris does the thing that will ultimately upend Achilles' life. He suggests to Helen that she run away with him to Troy. This is the call to adventure. After some haggling, she goes with Paris, and when Menelaus discovers she's missing, we discover the god he serves is honor. Paris greatly shames Menelaus by taking his wife, and Menelaus is instantly desperate to get her back. He convinces Agamemnon to lead a united army of Greeks to take Helen back. This plays into Agamemnon's desire for power, as holding Greece and Troy would allow complete domination of the Aegean Sea. The only tricky part is to convince arrogant Achilles to fight for a cause that isn't himself. Agamemnon sends Odysseus of Ithaca to convince Achilles. Odysseus is driven by a desire to see the Greek kingdoms united as one. Interrupting a sparring match between Achilles and his cousin, Patroclus, Odysseus convinces the warrior that there's glory to be had in Troy. Note that Patroclus is not Achilles' cousin in the source poem, and there is a rich vein of speculation that the 2 men were actually lovers. In the movie, Achilles goes to visit his mother Thetis, who warns Achilles that if he goes to Troy, he'll die there. The Greek ships set sail in a massive armada. Helen is fated in Troy and meets Paris' father, King Priam. The god or desire Priam serves is the literal gods. He's a very religious man. The Trojans know that Paris has just made their lives very difficult, so they prepare for the imminent invasion. At minute 40, 26.3% in, the ships land at Troy, and Achilles leaps over the gunwale into Act 2. Achilles' problem is that he serves the wrong master. The call to adventure is the thing that ultimately leads to Achilles confronting that problem. The first real step he takes towards that solution is here, on the sands of Troy. This speaks to one of the biggest changes from the source material, giving the protagonist a clearer arc. The movie starts the story earlier, so we can see what Achilles is like before the war, giving him more room to change by the end of the film. Achilles and his Myrmidons take the temple of Apollo. As a prize, Apollo is given the priestess Briseis, cousin to Hector, because for some reason everyone has to be related in this damn movie. In the poem, Briseis isn't even Trojan. She's a prize from one of many Greek raids carried out in the 10-year siege, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Briseis is the B character in this story. She is given to Achilles at minute 47, 32% in. As a priestess, the god she served was the literal god Apollo, but she will teach Achilles to value peace over glory through the rest of the film. So far, the movie has been pretty ho-hum, and the honeymoon section here is probably its weakest. By changing Achilles from an emotionally voluble warrior to a troubled stoic, and by changing his motivation from honor to glory, the story just does not work very well. For instance, Agamemnon takes Briseis from Achilles, and instead of just killing Agamemnon, Achilles refuses to fight and hides in his yurt to sulk. Instead of lashing out in rage, you know, his world-famous rage, the rage that starts the first line of the poem, Achilles acts like a petulant brat. To be sure, Achilles is petulant in the poem too, but the reason he refuses to fight in the poem is that he wants to spite Agamemnon. He wants to see the king laid low for publicly shaming Achilles. In the film, we've established that Achilles just wants glory. So why not kill the boss of the Greeks and just take his place? This mismatch of motivations between the source poem and the adapted movie arguably hurts the film, in my opinion. It's just harder to track what Achilles wants at any given moment. Now that the film version has gone off the rails, we actually start to sync up with the poem. The poem opens at this moment, 10 years into the siege of Troy, which lasts days in the film, and at the end of a plague sent by Apollo amongst the Greeks. At the start of the poem, one of Agamemnon's prizes is returned to her father so that Apollo will stop punishing them with disease, and Agamemnon takes Briseis from Achilles instead. Because of this, Achilles refuses to fight. It is a matter of honor with him, and honor constitutes the theme of the poem. The movie carries on with some internal Trojan affairs, and then syncs up with the poem again at the midpoint. In Troy, the midpoint comes at minute 76, 50% in. In the Iliad, the same beat is the call to adventure, and comes 9.9% into the Fagles translation. The beat is this: Paris agrees to fight Menelaus. In Troy, this is the midpoint because it raises the stakes and shifts the direction of the story. In the Iliad, this is the call to adventure because it's the thing that precipitates open combat between the two armies. Because in the Iliad, all that stuff about absconding with Helen happened 10 years previously. The Greeks have lived on the Trojan shore for that amount of time on their many ships, wary of open combat. Morale is low. And here, after 10 years, comes the chance to end the war honorably, mano a mano. In both versions, Paris faces Menelaus at first, but then turns tail and flees. In the Iliad, he is spirited away by his patron goddess Aphrodite, because nothing happens in the poem without a god or goddess pulling the strings. In the movie, Paris is just a coward, and Hector is forced to kill Menelaus, destroying any chance of peace between the forces. In both movie and poem, Paris's cowardice triggers open combat. And then things get worse, for the Greeks, but much better for the viewer. Now that Troy has caught up with its source material, it's suddenly a much better movie. Almost like the screenwriter was great at direct adaptation, but really bad at writing stories outside that scope. Yeah, fancy that. The Trojans send the Greeks back to their ships. Odysseus convinces Agamemnon to return Briseis to Achilles, because he knows that without Achilles, they can only lose. Achilles and Briseis grow close, despite the unpleasantness of their arrangement. Achilles still refuses to fight, for some reason. And against Hector's advice, the Trojans decide to sally out and hit the Greeks in their ships. In the gloaming of dawn, Hector duels who he thinks is Achilles. He kills his opponent, but it's actually Patroclus. The Trojans withdraw, and Achilles hears the news. This beat also shows up in the Iliad, so let's just backtrack a bit and see what's been going on in the poem. After Paris flees from battle in the Iliad, there's a lot of back and forth on the field. If you haven't read the Iliad, it's only as long as it is because every time anyone fights anyone, the poem spends ages introducing each combatant, their family and their history, and then shows them taunting each other before the actual fight ends very quickly, usually with something like a spear tip through the eye socket. It's kind of like if in the Avengers movies, the first time Iron Man meets Captain America, the whole movie stops and we watch the entirety of those heroes' origin films, and then the Avengers film resumes. That's why the Iliad is so long. And there's a lot of that happening in the Iliad during the refusal of the call. After fighting on the field, Hector returns to Troy to get some prayers going, and as he leaves the gates, he has a stunningly human moment with his family. He goes to cuddle his infant son, but the kid is scared by his father's horsehair helmet bobbing in the air. Hector laughs and goes out the gates, into what he now knows is a serious, ongoing fight. He's stepping into Act 2. This happens 25.1% into the Fagles translation, page 212. There is more combat, and the Greeks engage in sneaky night raids. The B characters in the poem are the Olympian gods, who play favourites on both sides. Zeus, the king of the gods, orders a moratorium on interference, and the Trojans beat the Greeks back to their ships. The B story crops up at the poem's midpoint, around 49% in, or page 343, as the god of the sea Poseidon defies Zeus to aid the Greeks in pushing back the Trojans. Shortly afterwards, Hera seduces Zeus to distract him, and various gods on the Greek side help their favoured pets against the Trojans. The Greeks push back, albeit without Achilles, but Patroclus puts on Achilles' armour and, under the gates of Troy, is slain. Here the poem and the film sync up properly. When Achilles learns of the death of Patroclus in both versions, he is distraught. In the movie, it's 106 minutes or 69.7% in. In the poem, it's 467 pages, or 72.6%. In both, this is the low point. Achilles' life is worse off now than at any other point before this. He's lost his closest friend and possibly lover, cousin. In the movie, Hector knows he's in serious trouble now. He shows his wife Andromache the back way out of Troy. Achilles holds funeral ceremonies for Patroclus. In the poem, the Greeks try to rouse Achilles, but it isn't until Thetis harangues Hephaestus into forging Achilles' new armor that he finally relents. The act break comes around page 503, 79.3% in. Achilles sweeps like a bloody sunrise onto the battlefield at the start of the poem's Act 3, and carves a path through the Dardanian defenders up to the gates. He then challenges Hector to a duel, one of the highlights of the poem. But in the movie, Achilles bypasses all the fighting up to the gates. At the start of Act 3, 118 minutes or 77.6% in, he goes straight to the gates to challenge Hector. This is the start of the final exam. Briseis has taught Achilles there are better masters to serve, greater gods to work for than glory, like love and peace and justice. But Achilles is blinded to that right now. He needs revenge. Just as in the poem, this duel is one of the movie's best scenes. In its climax, Achilles defeats Hector. In the poem, this is the reversal and actually constitutes the biggest challenge to Achilles' journey. Why? Because throughout the story, Achilles has been proud and selfish, and this moment is purely about selfishness and pride, his own honor and no one else's, especially the bit where he drags Hector's corpse around, attacking Priam's honor. This reversal hits in the poem around page 558, 89.9% in. There are still 2 books left in the poem. In the first, we see Achilles stubbornly host funeral games for Patroclus, and refuse to return Hector's body. In the second book, the poem's theme finally comes to fruition. King Priam infiltrates the Greek camp in the guise of a beggar and supplicates to Achilles to return his son. Priam talks about the intergenerational effects of violence and warfare, and how the greater honor resides not in the individual, but in something bigger than oneself. Family, country, gods, something. Priam talks of Achilles' father, Peleus. This gets through to Achilles. He's devastated by the old man's supplication. The humility Priam displays shames Achilles. He agrees to return Hector's corpse to Priam in the poem's climax. And so the story ends with Achilles a more humble and well-rounded man. The scene with Priam is another of the poem's best, and Peterson is careful to insert it roughly intact in the third act of the film. We see Achilles go through the same changes as in the poem, but because the filmmakers changed Achilles' motivation, the scene doesn't quite hit properly. If you've read the poem, this scene is great. Otherwise, it's just kind of out of place. Regardless, Pitt's performance of Achilles changes completely after this moment. He becomes grounded and calm. He has a new god to serve, peace, love, and intergenerational honor. He's ready to abandon the war and leave Troy in peace. But there's still more movie left. The filmmakers pieced together events from other sources to show us the Trojan horse and the sack of Troy. And they used this extra grace period to good effect, in my opinion. At minute 137, 90.1% in, Achilles' newfound peace is threatened when the Trojans take in the Greeks' wooden horse. There follows a chaotic battle scene in which Achilles is trying at least to rescue Briseis if he can't stop the carnage being inflicted by Agamemnon. Achilles reaches Briseis but is tragically killed by Paris shooting a coward's weapon, even though they're now on the same side. The Trojans flee, and the movie ends on this somber note, a tragic down note where the poem actually ends on something of an up. So, what can we learn by comparing the oldest story in the Western world with a movie version produced in the boom of epics following The Lord of the Rings? The most astonishing thing to me is that the Iliad actually has the same order, spacing, and tone in its major beats as modern blockbusters. This isn't a formula being foisted on us by Hollywood shills. This story structure is in the bones of the West, and possibly in the blood of all humanity. Just look at those spacings. Call to Adventure at 10%, break into Act 2 at 25%, midpoint around 50%, a low point at 70%, the break into Act 3 around 80%, and the reversal around 90%. When I realized this was what was happening in the Iliad, it blew my mind. It's partly what gave me the conviction to make this channel. I'm not trying to teach you how Hollywood formula works, I'm showing you how story works. Besides that, the poem is a lot of fun. Reading it is like getting a glimpse into the past. What kinds of equipment for living did Bronze Age Greeks need? Apparently, they wanted a story about setting your sights on something higher than yourself, of recognizing the honor you share with your kin, not just yourself. Touching that equipment is like speaking with a ghost from the distant past. It's incredible. Transport that into the early 21st century. What do we get? An uneven, muddled, but earnest and visually spectacular treatise on where to devote your life's energies. Achilles falls because he learned the theme's lesson too late. He served the wrong masters, glory and immortality, instead of peace and love and justice. The story is strong and arguably similar enough to the Iliads that we shouldn't throw rocks at the filmmakers. The jury is out though on that extra Act 1 the filmmakers fabricated. It deals with a lot of exposition that would already have been known to the poem's target audience, so I get that aspect, but the changes to Achilles' character don't help the film. Backing up to show your character's fullest journey is good writing advice, but so is having a consistent motivation and character. Homer didn't give us that first part, but he gave us the second. By default, I'm a purist, so I would have preferred a more faithful adaptation, but I can see the logic of this adaptation's changes. Regardless, the deep insights of both films are worth learning. Make sure you point your efforts in the right direction. If in doubt, choose something greater than yourself. Whether you're an ancient Greek or a modern YouTuber, that is some excellent equipment for living. Thanks for watching this breakdown. If you found it insightful, please leave a thumbs up. And as always, if I've missed something or another interpretation occurs to you, leave a comment. I'd love to read your opinion. And if you'd like to see more movie breakdowns, click subscribe and ring the bell icon to make sure you don't miss a single future video.